The Indiana Fever just sent shockwaves through the entire WNBA with one of the boldest and most ruthless roster shakeups in recent memory. Hours after being eliminated from playoff contention, the front office didn't wait for emotions to cool down or for players to process what had happened. Instead, they dropped a bombshell that instantly became the biggest headline in women's basketball: 8 players released in a single night. 8. That kind of purge doesn't happen quietly. It's a message. A declaration that change isn't coming, it's already here. Inside the Fever locker room, the atmosphere after that final game was suffocating. The players sat in silence, realizing that what was supposed to be the start of something special had instead become the end of an era. Whispers filled the air before anyone even left the building. Who's staying? Who's going? Who just played their last game in an Indiana jersey? There were no speeches, no tears, just quiet acceptance that something big was about to unfold. And then, before sunrise, the calls went out. Contracts were terminated, agents notified, and dreams abruptly paused. For fans, it felt like whiplash. One day, the Fever were a rising story, one of the most talked-about teams in the league. The next, they were dismantling the roster with surgical precision. But this wasn't some impulsive decision made in frustration after a disappointing season. This had been brewing for weeks behind the scenes. The tension between head coach Stephanie White and the front office had reached a boiling point. Disagreements over rotations, offensive systems, and even locker room dynamics had turned quiet frustrations into strategic chaos. Everyone knew something had to give, and when it did, it wasn't subtle. At the center of it all was Caitlin Clark, the face of the WNBA, the generational star who transformed Indiana from a struggling small-market team into must-watch television. The Fever had invested everything in her, but as the season progressed, fans started asking the uncomfortable question: why wasn't this team built around her? Why did the offense feel so mechanical, so predictable, so different from the fluid, electrifying style that made Clark a phenomenon at Iowa? She wasn't the same free-flowing floor general anymore. She was trapped in a rigid system that muted her instincts and slowed her rhythm. Coach White had installed a playbook heavy with set pieces, off-ball movements, and forced structures, something Clark never thrived in. She was at her best when she dictated the pace, reading and reacting to defenses, creating plays on the fly. But under this system, she often looked boxed in, second-guessing her own creativity. Even fans began to notice the difference. Clark was still great, still competitive, but something about her fire felt restrained. She wasn't the engine. She was a gear in a system that didn't know how to use her. When the Fever fell short in the postseason, the front office didn't see it as a bad break. They saw it as confirmation that the current formula wasn't working. The result? A total teardown. Out went the veterans with inflated contracts. Out went the role players who never quite found chemistry with Clark. Out went anyone who didn't fit the vision of a faster, freer, more instinct-driven offense. 8 players gone overnight. Names like Natasha Howard, Sydney Coulson, and Aerial Powers, experienced, respected, but ultimately expendable in the team's new direction. The message was loud and clear. The Caitlin Clark era isn't a concept anymore. It's the foundation. The Fever aren't just tweaking around the edges. They're rebuilding the entire franchise in her image. And that means everything from roster composition to play style to financial structure will now orbit around her. Behind the curtain, this overhaul also had a very practical motivation: money. The Fever's payroll had ballooned with contracts that weren't yielding results. Releasing 8 players wasn't just about sending a message, it was about creating cap space. Millions were cleared in one night, freeing up room for high IQ shooters, versatile defenders, and young talent willing to buy into a faster, more dynamic system. The kind of roster built to amplify Clark's brilliance instead of confining it. Fans could feel the shift immediately. On social media, hashtags like Dr. Clark Era and Dr. Fever Rebuild exploded across X and Instagram. Some called the move a masterstroke. Finally, the front office was committing to a long-term vision. Others saw it as reckless, a desperate attempt to appease sponsors and fans rather than letting basketball strategy guide the way. ESPN analysts debated whether this was genius or panic, but one thing was undeniable. Everyone was talking about the Indiana Fever. Inside the locker room, the emotions were complicated. Some players were relieved, others devastated. Veterans who had been through years of losing seasons now faced the reality that their time was up. Younger players, meanwhile, saw opportunity, an open door to prove themselves alongside a generational talent. Caitlin Clark herself stayed quiet, at least publicly. But when fans noticed she had liked a few posts supporting the front office's decisions, it sent the internet into another frenzy. Was this her subtle approval? Was she finally taking ownership of the franchise's direction? The Fever's transformation wasn't just strategic, it was symbolic. For years, Indiana had been the WNBA's forgotten team, the one stuck in rebuilding purgatory. But Clark's arrival changed everything. Ticket sales skyrocketed, merchandise sold out, national coverage surged. Suddenly, this was a team that mattered. And now, by clearing house, the Fever were doubling down on that newfound relevance. They weren't trying to fit Clark into their system anymore, they were rebuilding the system around her. That means bringing in players who understand how to move with her, not around her. Shooters who can space the floor, cutters who read her eyes, defenders who can switch without sacrificing tempo. The Fever want the game to flow the way it did at Iowa, fast, reactive, and fearless. A style where Clark doesn't just score but orchestrates, controls, and elevates everyone around her, of course. All of this puts immense pressure on one person, head coach Stephanie White. Her future in Indiana is suddenly the biggest question of the offseason. The same coach once praised for guiding a young team now faces whispers that her days might be numbered. Her system and Clark's instincts don't mesh, and the front office knows it. Unless she adapts, and fast, she might be the next one packing her bags. The irony is that White's structured offense worked when the team had no star to center around. But now that it does, her rigidity could be the one thing holding them back. What happens next will define this franchise for years to come. The Fever's front office has positioned themselves to dominate the offseason, armed with cap flexibility, public attention, and the most marketable player in women's basketball. They're reportedly targeting elite shooters, veteran leaders, and players who can thrive in a read-and-react offense. Think fast, fluid, and fearless, a complete culture shift. Practices will focus on tempo and spacing, not drawn-out plays. The days of slow, mechanical basketball are over. This is about instinct, energy, and synergy. Still, the stakes couldn't be higher. Every move from here on out will be scrutinized. Every trade, every signing, every play call will either validate this gamble or expose it as hubris. The Fever aren't just betting on Caitlin Clark, they're betting everything. And in the unforgiving world of professional basketball, there's no middle ground between genius and disaster. Let us know what you think. Was this bold roster overhaul exactly what Indiana needed? Or did they move too fast too soon? Will Caitlin Clark's leadership carry this new-look Fever to glory, or will the pressure consume them? Drop your thoughts in the comments below.